I'm Stephanie Ruozzo. I'm the Director of Education and Engagement for Cleveland Opera Theater right here in Cleveland, Ohio. So we are a regional opera company. We are Cleveland's premier opera company, and we do a lot of work in the greater Cleveland area, staging main stage productions, often in Playhouse Square, but we often take the productions around to anywhere, really, in the greater Cleveland area.
Is opera a genre or a medium?
Ooh, I'm going to go with medium. Because there are so many different kinds of operas out there. If you listen to just the Orpheus story, the Orpheus story has been set by so many different composers between 1600 and 2020. It's ridiculous in a good way how many options we have for Orpheus. Neither of them sounds the same, even though it's pretty much the exact same story each time. And so all of those different sounds we can call subgenres. We can look at the intermedi of Florence. We can look at the Reform operas. We can look at Verismo. We can look at modern opera. We can look at French operetta. All of those are ways of telling the Orpheus story. Those are all subgenres. But they're all in the medium of opera, that is, united music and words, telling a series of events, evoking certain themes.
So along those same lines, do you think it's coincidental that the three most popular Broadway shows of the last 30 years are all opera, and also drastically different ones in Phantom, Rent, and Hamilton?
Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said for not having to go back and forth between spoken performative mode and sung performative mode. Because that in itself takes you out of the performance for a moment, right? Anytime you have that shift, there's a difficulty. When we sing something through beginning to end, you don't have that difficulty. It's just, here's the story and here's the song. So yeah, I think that's a great way for audiences to be sucked in.
And kept in.
Yes.
Kept in.
It's a way of taking away the rules of mundane reality. Like, I'm clearly not going to sing about my hot chocolate being late in the morning. But in an opera, I can. And it becomes hilarious because we're in that mode. I'm not bound by the rules of what I would do. I'm bound by what sounds good.
Let us take a hypothetical person. They like music. They would like to appreciate opera. They like the idea of getting conversant in it. What are some steps that they can take without getting overwhelmed by 400 years of history, and it often being in a language you don't speak, and there being some leitmotifs that they might not follow?
That's a good question. What I would do if I were just starting out is I might do something like Google famous operas. Click through some of the plot lines. Find a plot line that sounds interesting to you. Maybe you're in a humorous mood, so you end up picking Così fan tutte, and you're like, hey, I want a story about these like weird boyfriend-girlfriend pairings that go off the rails. Maybe you're in a more of a contemplative mood, and you want something spiritual, so you're like, okay, I'm going to listen to Dialogue des Carmélites, which, you know, a story about women who renounce the world for eternal glory, despite every violent political threat around them. So you want something serious and uplifting like that. And there are all kinds of spectrums in between. You have a whole spectrum of entertainment to choose from. Find a plot that sounds interesting to you. And then take it from there. YouTube sections of it. Don't even listen to the whole thing the whole time through. Find one scene that might excite you. Or one, even usually if you look on Wikipedia, they have the arias listed. So find one aria that sounds interesting and listen to 5 minutes of that music. And if that captivates you, go find the next aria. When you're done exploring that opera, go find another one by the same composer. Now you've already got his or her language down. So you're like, okay, I know this sound world. I've lived in this sound world. Let's see what other stories they're telling with that. And then once you've dipped your toes in, now you have a foundation. Oh, I'm a fan. And now that you're in the fandom, great. Now you can go explore whatever tickles your fancy. There are no limits.
Now, bearing in mind that everyone's taste is different, and everyone's taste is to be respected. Are there one or two operas that you find particularly approachable or enjoyable to the opera novice?
I would say story-wise, anything by Mozart. Because Mozart was writing for the people. He was writing to entertain. So Don Giovanni, great drama. You love to hate the guy. You love to love his victims. And he gets his in the end. It's so satisfying. So something by Mozart, or Marriage of Figaro, which is just, I laugh. I have literally laughed out loud simply reading plot summaries of that. So plot-wise, Mozart, hands down. I think the most beautiful music, again, totally subjective, Traviata. It's all dance music, it's all waltzes and polkas. So you're tapping your feet the whole time, you're joyous, or you're having your heart ripped out in the best way possible. So yeah, sound-wise, Traviata.
The other nice thing about Traviata, or the Mozart operas, whether you know it or not, you know the music.
Yes. If you know Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, you know Mozart, right? So this is what Western culture is founded on. Like, this is the stuff that we already swim in. It's just a matter of cognitively recognizing that, oh yeah, I'm swimming.
Why do the music and plots of famous operas still pervade our culture?
Oh, because the best operas, and I'm going to put best in air quotes because best means something different to everybody, but the best operas tell stories whose point is still relevant. So, when we look at La Traviata, we're talking about love and loss between people who want to be together but just can't get on the same plane. That still happens in 2022. When we look at The Marriage of Figaro, we're looking at human foible and folly and class fighting and household fighting and family dynamics gone wrong. Those things still happen in 2022. So even though a story may be set 300 or 400 years ago, we are still experiencing something like that today. And good sounds, again, I'm going to put good in air quotes, good sounds never stop being good. So if a C major chord sounded great in 1750, a C major chord is going to sound just as great in 2022. So if I put that timeless story to a beautiful sound, or sometimes an ugly sound when I want to convey the ugliness of a scenario, when I put that timeless story to a timeless sound, people can enjoy that regardless of where and when they live.
What was your introduction to opera?
So I came at this from a very weird route. As a clarinetist, I started in my high school playing in pit orchestras for musicals. So I came from the land of Gershwin and Disney and 42nd Street, all of that fun stuff. But as I was an undergrad studying music, obviously like my interest in dramatic music led me to seek out more options, and that just happened to lead me to Puccini and Verdi and Mozart, and it grew from there. And I kind of just got a taste for whatever story I can find, set to whatever music I can find. I want to experience that. Not to say I've liked, that's a big misconception about being an opera fan, is if you're an opera fan, you must like everything. And we all have our tastes, right? But yeah, I just kind of like developed this appetite to experience as many stories as I could.
You had mentioned the Disney. So let's get into it. Let's get right to it. Why do we so often see the music of opera paired with animation? Now, obviously, like Bugs in the Wagner cycle is the classic example, but you've got Willy, the operatic way. And even as recently as like the movie Trolls, one of the musical themes that they kept going back to was the Hall of the Mountain King, that bum 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 bum. So why do we often see animation paired with opera?
I think because from the beginning, opera was meant to be spectacle. Opera was invented as a courtly art in the early 1600s, right? So it was a way for rich people to invite all of their rich friends and say, I'm richer than you because I can afford machinery and a bunch of singers and a bunch of instrumentalists and these fancy costumes and fire and whatever else they put. So opera has always, from the first, been about spectacle. And unfortunately, the physics of the real world that we live in limit the kind of spectacle that we can put on stage. But animation doesn't have those limits. So things like Fantasia, I mean, Walt Disney was very explicit about, like, I want to create the stories that go along with these sounds that we can't create in the real world. So animation gives us that liberty and the freedom to realize the fullest potential of the sound waves around us.
To add along to that, how much of it is just it often being in the public domain?
That is an excellent point, because especially so much of the big opera is European, and European music is not under American copyright law. So it's really easy to get a Puccini piece and just be like, okay, we want to do this. That is incredibly efficient.
Now, one more aspect of this that I'd like to touch on, and it's forcing me to use a phrase that both you and I don't like, but it explains a concept. Often opera will be used as a way to mix, quote, highbrow and, quote, lowbrow. Bear in mind that there's no damn such thing.
So true.
But that dissonance still creates a fun interplay. Is that what people will sometimes go to opera for?
So class politics have been part of opera from the beginning. Like I mentioned, it was a courtly art. Then as early as 1637, the first public opera hall opens in Venice, the Teatro San Cassiano. Still open, by the way. And so ever since, there's been this tension between who has access to which pieces of art. And that ebbs and flows throughout the centuries. But we're kind of living in the aftermath of the Second Industrial Revolution. And an author named Levine has written about, he has a book called Highbrow, Lowbrow, actually. And he's written about, in the wake of the Second Industrial Revolution, we see this stratification of society with the emerging middle class, and all of a sudden, the upper classes need a way to separate themselves from the middle, as well as, of course, the lower class, which they've always been separated from. But we put up these kind of invisible societal barriers between high art and low art, mainly in the way we market things. And we are still living in the wake of that 150 years later. And so that's actually a huge part, not to plug the opera company or anything, but that's why Cleveland Opera Theater's mission is Opera for All, because we want to consciously break down that barrier that, no, literally everyone can enjoy that C major chord. Yeah, these class politics are active for centuries. And there was a sociologist in France, I think in the 60s, my timeline could be off, but Pierre Bourdieu, who coined the idea of cultural capital. And so according to Bourdieu, the idea is that people who want to be perceived as high class will engage in activities like going to opera halls or touring museums, anything highbrow, to gain cultural capital, to gain cachet in society. If I go to an opera, I must be a better person than you. If I appreciate this painting, I must be a better person than you. And so cultural capital is still very much a part of the opera-going experience. And yeah, I would like to say anyone, regardless of the actual monetary capital that they possess, can participate in the soul cleansing of a good opera.
So those are all my opera questions, but I do have some lightning round questions.
Ooh, okay.
What's your favorite Jerome Kern song? There is a correct answer.
Smoke Gets in Your Eyes?
Thank you.
Okay, yes.
Thank you. What is your favorite Fantasia sequence?
Oh, I mean, probably The Rite of Spring. It's the most depressing one, but doggone it, it's...
Even if Stravinsky hated it?
I feel like Stravinsky and we would have been friends, but I would also roll my eyes at him a lot and say, you're taking this way too seriously. And his reaction to Fantasia would be one of those instances.
The funny thing about Rite of Spring, which is frankly my favorite sequence too, it started as a dinosaur thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I first saw this, I was like a 5 or 6 year old boy, so dinosaur. But also, dissonance
Well, that it's primitivist, right? It's supposed to speak to the part. It's supposed to speak to our monkey brain. That it's just here's sound and motion, and to heck with all the rules you think you know. We are bound only to sound and motion.